I still remember the sound of the envelope sliding across the oak table. A small, dry whisper that felt louder than the funeral hymn outside the window. Rain had begun to stitch the gutters that afternoon. A steady, sullen rhythm that matched the loose thudding of my heartbeat. I sat across from the solicitor with my hands folded so tightly they ached. The names on the paper looked like someone else's handwriting, as if the world had been turned briefly and revealed a different script for me to learn. "Aunt Layla left you something," he said, the kind of sentence meant to be both gentle and official. He wore a tie of a color I couldn't name. His eyes flicked to me, measuring. "There's a condition." I had known Layla all my life, not as a constant presence, but as a compass that sometimes flickered and pointed, then went quiet. She was the aunt who packed her suitcase to visit a country she had never seen, the aunt who left a single typewritten postcard in my childhood drawer with the sentence, "Don't be small because others want you to be." She had lived alone in the big house on the hill, surrounded by orchids and clocks that never quite agreed with one another. She died in that house, and now her handwriting waited for me in the solicitor's office. "You must live 1 year," he read, his voice slowing as if those 3 words were stones, "as the person she believed you truly were, commencing from the date you sign acceptance. Fulfillment of this condition grants sole possession of the inheritance, the house, the contents, and her estate." The room contracted. The rain beyond the glass made everything outside feel washed out, dreamlike. I thought for a moment that maybe the solicitor would laugh, that he would admit this was theatrics, some eccentric posthumous whim. But the papers were real. The signatures, the hospital note confirming her passing, even the photograph of Layla on the veranda, eyes like a map. It was real. My immediate reaction was anger. Not at the reading itself, but at the way this arranged my life into a single, impossible demand. Live as the person she believed I truly was. What did Layla believe? I had an idea, a seed of a memory, a single afternoon when she had braided my hair for a school play and murmured, "You have a softness that needs room." At 15, when I had told her I was confused, she had given me a tin of her mother's buttons and said, "Collect what you love. It will tell you who you are." But those were hints, not maps. There was also fear. Fear of judgment. Of the gossipy neighbors who had always smiled with mouths that closed too quickly. Of family members who believed identity was a box neatly labeled and never to be opened. I thought of my father's voice the last time I told him something true about myself. The silence that followed had been long enough to sink a boat. The inheritance felt less like a gift and more like a test, a public folding of me into a shape that might crack under the weight. And yet, beneath the anger and the fear, there was an odd, stirring curiosity. It was as if Layla had left me the key to a locked room in my own chest. The phrasing, "the person she believed you truly were," sounded less like command and more like invitation. Layla had always believed in possibility. Perhaps she had seen something in me that I couldn't allow myself to see. A pattern of small gestures, a way my fingers moved when I adjusted a hem, the softness of my voice when I read aloud to her in winter. She had observed me in ways the rest of the world did not. That night, the house on the hill felt enormous and filled with Layla's presence. Her closet still smelled faintly of lavender and old paper. The living room harbored the precise silence of a life kept in careful order. I wandered through her rooms like a tourist in a country I once knew. There were dresses folded in cedar chests, not showy gowns but clothes that carried their own histories, a blouse with a mend at the cuff, a skirt softened at the hip from years of wear. They were ordinary, intimate artifacts. I found photographs stacked in shoeboxes. Layla at 20 with cropped hair and an impish grin, Layla at 50 posing with a gardener, Layla at 75 making a grimace at a camera. In the margins of an old journal she had written, "Your life is not an accident. It is a practice." The will had not required me to wear any particular garment. It had not demanded a public proclamation. It required time, a year. That was the cruelty and the mercy of it. Time could be a kind friend who allowed change to happen without the glare of a spotlight, but time could also be a pressure that ground impatience into something sour. Told no one. Not at first. I signed the acceptance papers at the solicitor's desk with a hand that trembled in ways I hadn't expected. The house became mine on paper that same afternoon. In practice, it felt like inheriting both a shelter and an accusation. The neighbors would whisper, the cousins would tilt their heads, and the town would dissect the will with the keen interest of people looking for plot twists. But privacy still existed inside the house, behind thick curtains and beneath ceilings dusted with the smell of old cedar. I decided I would begin here, within these rooms that carried Layla's breath. On the second morning, I opened one of the cedar chests and pulled out a scarf. It was a simple thing, silk patterned in deep burgundy petals. For reasons I could not articulate, wrapping it around my shoulders made the room settle differently. The mirror in Layla's dressing room returned an image that was familiar and strange. I examined my face as if seeing it for the first time. The line of my jaw softened by the light, the eyes that had looked out at the world with guarded neutrality now curious. There was a tenderness in the way the scarf lay, an ease I had not permitted myself. A small truth shivered under my ribs. I liked the sensation. It was a lightness that felt less like masquerade and more like recognition. Days became a private rehearsal. I learned the cadence of Layla's teacups, how she placed them on saucers with a small, exacting motion. I learned which books she had favored, the margins of certain volumes annotated with a spidery, precise script. I practiced walking in shoes that fit differently, feeling the tiny shift in posture they demanded. I experimented quietly with clothing in the privacy of the house, not for anyone's amusement or shock, but to see which choices felt like alignments and which felt like costumes. Some garments felt foreign, colors that did not belong. Others felt like coming home. Layla had left more than clothes. There were letters, too, bundles of them, tied with ribbons and labeled in her neat hand. For when you doubt, for when you are brave, for when they call you strange. The first letter I opened was short and direct. There is a small act that will let you know if you are walking toward truth. Listen to what makes you stay and what makes you leave. The truth will both calm and unsettle you. It will ask for courage. It will be worth the risk. Her handwriting felt like a hand on my shoulder. The town noticed my presence at the house, but not, at first, anything more. I cultivated a routine that read normal on the surface. Lawn trimmed, mail collected, grocery runs made. Yet in the evenings I would sit at Layla's writing desk and try on different versions of myself, recording in a small, private notebook how each choice settled inside me. I wrote things I had never spoken aloud. The ache of wanting to be noticed as I felt, the grief for years of pretending that the easiest path was always the right one. I wrote about the sting of my father's silence, about how names like weak and selfish had once been hurled at me like knives. Writing was a practice in survival. The more I wrote, the more the sentences themselves became a map. Once a neighbor, Mrs. Hamid, whose garden geraniums flourished like a rebellion against the pavement, dropped by with a casserole. She paused at the door, studying the house with a curious softness. "You're keeping her place alive," she said, peering at the framed photos in the hall. There was kindness in her voice, uncomplicated and warm. She would be proud. I wanted to tell her everything. I wanted to unspool the will and lay it all bare like a strange tale. Instead I thanked her and invited her in for tea. We spoke of ordinary things. The weather, the town, the price of eggs. But beneath the amiable conversation, I felt the gravity of hidden things, the way a small secret could tilt the axis of a life. The first fortnight unfolded into a month. I met the requirement in the will with a mix of defiance and curiosity. The house became both workshop and sanctuary. Layla's things no longer felt like relics. They were tools. Her clothes taught me balance. Her letters gave me permission. The challenge still held its teeth. There would be moments of exposure, and the calendar had not yet shown whether I would be brave enough for what lay ahead. But already, in the slow, private movements of my days, I found a rhythm that hummed with possibility. On an overcast Sunday, when the sky looked like scrunched paper, I found an old photograph in a frame that had been tucked away behind others. It was Layla at a seaside carnival, hair cropped, smiling like someone who had just told the world a secret. Someone, perhaps the camera, had captured the moment her mouth tilted in mischief. On the back she had written one word and a date. Begin. The handwriting was her usual, steady script. The date was the day I had first left home for university years ago. The word struck me as instruction and benediction both. Layla, in her careful way, had set this up not to punish but to prod. She had believed, fiercely and perhaps stubbornly, that I could become more whole if I stepped into possibilities she could sense but I could not yet name. The inheritance, for all its clauses and conditions, was also a gift. Not merely of a house, but of an invitation into a life I had not yet dared to live. That evening, I sat by the window with Layla's scarf around my shoulders and watched the rain carve lines across the glass. I thought about beginnings and the strange hunger that sometimes accompanies them. The year ahead felt like a long corridor with doors I could not yet see. I was not yet ready to announce anything to the world. I was barely ready to tell myself the truth. But I had signed the papers. The clock in the hallway ticked on, indifferent. Layla's voice, the memory of it, lingered like a lantern. Begin, she had written. The door had been nudged open. All that remained was for me to step through. It began quietly. Not with an explosion, but with a subtle shift, the kind that sneaks into your life disguised as coincidence. A button that wouldn't fasten the way it used to. A voice that softened when speaking to strangers. A reflection that started looking back with questions rather than certainty. 3 months had passed since I'd signed the papers. The house had grown familiar, but the person living inside it felt less so. I'd built a quiet routine. Mornings spent in the garden, afternoons in the library, nights writing letters to no one. But underneath that rhythm was a tension, a low hum of something unspoken. Layla's will wasn't a suggestion. It was a test of endurance, of honesty. Living as the person she believed I truly was, wasn't about dressing differently. It was about becoming someone new. Or perhaps someone who had always been there, waiting. It was on one of those gray afternoons, when the rain misted like breath against the windows, that I found the envelope. It was hidden inside a drawer in Layla's dressing table, marked with a faint scent of lilac and old ink. My name was written across the front, not in the formal way of a will, but with the tenderness of a personal letter. You've taken the first step. Now the world must see what you've seen privately. You can't spend a year hiding. Begin with one truth, one act that makes you tremble, and the next will reveal itself. I read the words again and again until they began to tremble in my hands. The first step had been solitude. The next was exposure. My sanctuary had to open its doors. That thought terrified me. The world outside wasn't kind to things it didn't understand. I imagined the stares, the whispers, the cold laughter that slices through fragile courage. But Layla's challenge was clear. I couldn't remain invisible. She wanted me to test the edges of my fear, to see if I could live truthfully when eyes were watching. The next morning I stood before the mirror and stared for what felt like hours. My reflection was no longer just me. It was a story mid-sentence. I reached for a blouse from Layla's wardrobe, pale cream with soft sleeves that caught the light like water. I paired it with jeans, simple and safe, but enough to feel the shift. My fingers shook as I buttoned the collar. It wasn't costume anymore. It was declaration, quiet but deliberate. I stepped outside. The town seemed louder than I remembered. Car doors slamming, a child shouting, the hiss of tires on wet pavement. Every sound felt amplified, as if the universe were watching. My destination was harmless enough. The small grocery on Main Street. But each step felt like walking a wire over memory, suspended between who I had been and who I might become. When I entered, the bell above the door chimed, cheerful and sharp. The cashier, an older woman with glasses hanging from a chain, looked up, smiled faintly, and returned to her register. I moved down the aisles, heart racing, half expecting someone to stop me. No one did. People were too busy choosing bread, too wrapped in their own worlds to notice the small tremor of mine. But it was at the checkout that I met the first test. Behind me in line stood a group of teenagers, laughter sharp, energy untamed. I could feel their eyes grazing me, the way curiosity sometimes borders on cruelty. One of them whispered something. Another snickered. I didn't hear the words clearly, but I didn't need to. The laughter said enough. My throat tightened. My first instinct was to run, to drop everything and flee back to the safety of the hill. But something stronger than fear held me still. Layla's voice, calm and wry, echoed in my memory. Don't be small because others want you to be. So I smiled, paid for my groceries, walked out with my head high, heart pounding so violently it hurt. It was a small victory, invisible to everyone else, but to me it was a storm survived. That night I wrote in my journal, "The challenge isn't what the world says, it's whether I can live without hiding from it." I thought the world would hate me, mostly ignores me. Maybe that's scarier because it means I can actually exist. Days became weeks. The line between the house and the town blurred. I began to visit more places. The bookstore, the post office, the little cafe near the harbor. Most people treated me kindly, or at least politely. A few stares, a few murmurs, but nothing fatal. Slowly, fear loosened its grip. In its place came something I hadn't felt in years. Relief. Then came the invitation. One afternoon, while sorting Layla's mail, I found a small envelope addressed to Resident of the Hill House. Inside was a card, an invitation to the annual spring gala hosted by the community center. It was Layla's favorite event. She'd attended every year until her passing. The note at the bottom read, "We hope you'll represent her memory." Represent her. The phrase burned. To attend in her stead would mean walking into a hall filled with faces I'd known all my life. People who remembered me differently. The idea made my pulse quicken. Yet something deeper urged me forward. Perhaps this was the next part of her challenge. Not just to exist, but to be seen. The night of the gala arrived like a dare. I stood before the wardrobe for nearly an hour, caught between fear and longing. My hand finally settled on a long, flowing black dress. Simple, elegant, the kind Layla would have chosen. It fit too perfectly, as if she had known I'd wear it one day. The fabric whispered when I moved, a sound like confidence disguised as silk. When I arrived, the music was already playing. Conversations rippled across the hall, glasses clinking. At first, no one recognized me, not because I was unrecognizable, but because no one expected me to exist like this. Then came the first double take, the first murmured, "Is that?" followed by a wave of quiet astonishment. The whispers weren't cruel. They were curious. Mrs. Hamid found me near the refreshment table. Her expression warm, almost proud. "You look just like her tonight," she said softly. Layla would have loved this. That sentence nearly undid me. Not because it was flattery, but because it was truth. I did look like her. Not just in clothing, but in presence. The same quiet confidence, the same knowing smile. For the first time, I understood what Layla might have meant by the person she believed you truly were. Maybe she'd seen herself in me. The courage she'd once hidden now asking to be reborn through me. The night passed in a blur of light and trembling laughter. People approached with cautious admiration. Others avoided me entirely. But as the evening drew on, the fear dissolved. I danced once, laughed once, breathed easily for the first time in years. When I returned home past midnight, the house was silent except for the ticking clock. On the table near the window, I noticed something I hadn't before. A note tucked under a vase, written in Layla's unmistakable hand. "You've faced the eyes of others. Now face your own. There is more to see and more to feel." The challenge was never about them. It was always about you. Her words settled in me like a quiet storm. The year was far from over, but I felt something irreversible begin that night. The crossing from disguise into truth, from experiment into emotion. The challenge had awakened a new current inside me, and it was pulling me toward something deeper, something I could no longer deny. There comes a moment when pretending becomes indistinguishable from becoming. I didn't realize it was happening. Not at first. It began subtly, like a song you start humming without noticing the words. After the gala, the world did not collapse as I had feared. The whispers eventually died down, replaced by quiet curiosity or polite indifference. The town had seen me, not the old version of me, not the version shaped by expectation, but me in motion unguarded. The silence that followed was strangely liberating. I found myself smiling more. My voice softened, my gestures grew lighter, and something within me, some buried stillness, began to bloom. The change wasn't deliberate. It was as if Layla's presence had become a gentle wind inside me, guiding without demanding. Each morning I woke earlier. I brewed tea the way she did. 3 minutes steeped, 2 cubes of sugar, a slice of lemon. I began tending to her orchids, learning how delicate their roots were, how much they craved light but not heat. Their fragility mirrored something in me. I learned to nurture both. In time, the house that once felt like inheritance became home. I rearranged the furniture, not to erase Layla, but to make space for myself within her walls. The mirrors reflected not a guest, but a resident, someone who no longer looked like a stranger trying to perform, but someone learning to breathe freely. Yet with comfort came a new kind of unease. Because once you stop pretending, you start feeling. It began one morning when I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. I was wearing one of Layla's soft cardigans and a flowing skirt I'd found tucked deep in her closet. My hair had grown longer, falling past my jawline in waves I hadn't cut since the reading of the will. The sunlight from the window framed everything in an amber hue, and for a heartbeat I didn't see me. I saw someone new, someone peaceful, someone real. The thought scared me not because it was foreign but because it was right. I remembered the exact moment that realization took hold. I sat at the vanity, brushing my hair absent-mindedly, and whispered aloud, "Is this who I am?" The silence that followed didn't answer. It confirmed. That day, I walked into town not as a performance, but as myself. Not honoring a condition, but living a truth. The shopkeeper, who used to avoid eye contact, greeted me with a soft smile. The cafe owner, who had once hesitated to serve me, offered me a seat by the window. The world, it seemed, was adjusting too. Then came the letter. Another of Layla's, this time hidden behind an old photograph in her desk. It was dated nearly a decade before her death. "You won't believe this now, but I always saw the way you looked at your reflection. It wasn't shame, it was longing. There's no shame in wanting softness. The world punishes it because it fears what it cannot categorize. But you, my dear, were never meant to live inside anyone's definition." Her words tore through me. Longing, softness, fear. I had built my life around those 3 things. One buried, one forbidden, one constant. That evening I went through her closet again, not as a scavenger this time, but as a seeker. I touched the fabrics she once loved, the colors she favored. Muted rose, ash gray, soft cream. Each garment carried her scent, faint but persistent. I realized then that my transformation wasn't about becoming her. It was about continuing her story. She had lived with the world's scrutiny. I would live with its echoes. Over the next months, adaptation became evolution. My voice found its rhythm again, softer but confident. I began writing more, filling notebooks with thoughts that no longer hid behind euphemisms. I stopped calling the clothes hers. I called them mine. Even my movements began to change. There was grace where tension once lived. Layla had taught me that presentation wasn't performance. It was communication. It was how the soul said, "This is who I am." But the world doesn't let truth unfold without challenge. One afternoon, while walking back from the library, I ran into my cousin, the first family member to see me since the funeral. He looked at me as if time had warped, his eyes scanning me from head to toe. He didn't speak for several seconds, just shook his head, half in disbelief, half in pity. "So, this is what you're doing now?" His tone was clipped, sharp around the edges. "This is who I am," I replied, my voice quiet but steady. He laughed, a sound without humor. "Layla's will really messed you up, huh?" I felt a flicker of pain but also something stronger. Maybe it fixed what was already broken. He didn't have a response. Just a muttered insult and a shake of the head before walking away. The air afterward felt heavy, but not unbearable. Once, such words would have shattered me. Now, they only confirmed how far I'd come. Back home, I opened another one of Layla's letters labeled for when they call you strange. Let them. Strange means unafraid of imitation. Strange means free enough to unsettle others. You were born to unsettle the ordinary. I cried then, not out of sadness but release. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to blend in. I was trying to exist. Fully, unapologetically, beautifully strange. The house reflected that. I filled it with life. Paintings, music, flowers that Layla never grew. I began to host small gatherings, inviting kind souls from the town who had grown curious but not cruel. We spoke of art, of freedom, of how the world shapes and breaks people who don't fit its molds. And though I didn't say it aloud, I knew what I was becoming. The lines between he and she, between what I had been told to be and what I was discovering, began to blur beautifully. My reflection no longer frightened me. Felt like an old friend finally home. The year's halfway mark approached quietly, the days melting into golden summer evenings. I marked it with another entry in my journal. Adaptation is not about pretending anymore. It's about permission to breathe, to change, to exist as I wish. I think this is what she wanted for me. Maybe this is what she meant by the person she believed I truly was. That night before sleeping, I walked to Layla's mirror, the tall one she used to stand before each morning, and whispered, "I think I'm starting to understand." For the first time, the reflection smiled back without hesitation. Summer arrived quietly that year, not with fireworks or noise, but with light that lingered longer each evening. The orchids on the windowsill bloomed in soft shades of violet, and the air smelled of rain-soaked soil and new beginnings. It was in this calm that I began to feel something I hadn't felt since childhood. Peace, not as an escape, but as a belonging. The rhythm of my days had settled into a delicate balance. The world outside had learned to stop staring, and I had learned to stop explaining. The whisper of judgment no longer haunted me. I was living as myself, not out of defiance, not out of duty to a will, but out of quiet truth. And then life decided to test that peace. It began with a knock on the door one late afternoon, when sunlight spilled like honey across the living room. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, a familiar face greeted me, though one I hadn't seen in years. It was Daniel. We had grown up together, childhood friends bound by secrets and laughter, until time and distance had turned us into polite strangers. He was taller now, his hair shorter, his expression warmer. But his eyes, they hadn't changed. They carried that same curious depth, the kind that made you feel seen. "I heard you were living here," he said, smiling gently. "Mind if I come in?" I hesitated for a second. I wasn't sure which version of me he remembered, or whether he'd recognize the person standing before him now. But something in his tone felt safe, so I nodded. The hours that followed unfolded like a dream I didn't want to wake from. We sat by the old window, the one that looked out over the hills, and talked. About Layla, about the past, about how time reshapes people in ways they never expect. He spoke with such ease that I forgot, for a while, how self-conscious I had once been. At one point he paused, studying me. "You've changed," he said softly. "I know. It suits you," he added. His voice was genuine. No judgment, no hesitation. That simple sentence did something to me. It loosened something deep inside. A knot I hadn't realized was still there. For the first time I wasn't just accepted, I was seen. He began visiting often after that. Sometimes to bring flowers for the garden, sometimes just to talk. Our conversations grew longer, deeper, about art, identity, loneliness. He'd help me fix things around the house, teasing that I was hopeless with tools. I'd laugh and remind him that I was better with words than with wrenches. But underneath those easy moments, something began to stir. Warmth. Connection. A quiet gravity that pulled us together in ways neither of us dared name. One evening, after tending to the orchids, we found ourselves sitting by candlelight, the air thick with that soft, unspoken tension. I remember the way the flame danced between us, how he looked at me, not as the person I used to be, but as the one I had become. He reached across the table, fingers brushing mine. "You seem lighter," he said. "Happier." I smiled faintly. I think I finally stopped pretending to be someone else. To be someone I thought the world wanted, I said quietly. Layla always believed there was more to me. I think she was right. Daniel didn't answer right away. His gaze softened. She always saw people clearly. I think she saw this version of you long before anyone else did. Something in his words broke the last wall I'd been holding. I felt tears rising, not from sadness but release. He didn't speak again. He simply reached forward and wiped them away with his thumb, gentle as breath. That night when he left, the air in the room felt different, charged, alive. For the first time I realized how deep this journey had gone. It wasn't just about appearance or name or acceptance. It was about emotion, the kind that demands truth in every sense. Over the next weeks, I found myself thinking of him more often. His laugh, his calmness, the way he treated me like I'd always been this person. It made me feel seen in a way mirrors never could. Yet, it also frightened me, because with affection comes vulnerability, and vulnerability had always been my hardest language. Then one evening a letter arrived, the second to last one from Layla's collection, tucked inside a book I hadn't opened yet. Its label read, "For when your heart begins to tremble, love is not a reward for becoming someone new. It's the mirror that shows you who you were all along. If someone loves you for who you are becoming, let them. They might be the bridge between who you were and who you're meant to be." I read it again and again, my heart pounding. Layla's foresight was uncanny, almost otherworldly. It was as if she'd known every step I would take, every emotion I'd feel. Days later, I invited Daniel over for dinner. The evening unfolded easily. Laughter, shared memories, and that quiet electricity between us that neither of us could ignore anymore. After dessert, we stepped outside. The night air was cool, the sky painted with stars. He turned to me, his voice barely a whisper. "Can I tell you something?" He nodded. "I don't know what to call what I feel when I look at you, but it's real. It's like I've been waiting to meet you my whole life, even though I've known you for years." Froze. The words felt unreal, like a dream spilling into reality. My chest tightened. "Do you mean?" "Yes," he said simply. "You." Silence stretched between us. Soft, heavy, sacred. And then, without thinking, I stepped closer. Our hands met again, and this time neither of us pulled away. It wasn't a storybook moment. It wasn't fireworks or music. It was stillness. Two souls recognizing each other after years of searching. That night after he left, I sat by Layla's mirror once more. My reflection stared back. Calm, radiant, alive. I traced my fingers along the glass and whispered, "I think I'm in love." And for the first time, the person in the reflection whispered back, not in sound but in certainty, "You are. And it's okay." The next morning, as sunlight warmed the curtains, I realized something profound. My transformation wasn't about becoming different. It was about uncovering the truth I had buried beneath fear. The will, the clothes, the year, they weren't a punishment. They were Layla's way of freeing me from a life of pretending. And now, love had entered that freedom, weaving warmth through the cracks she had helped me open. But one question still lingered. What did Layla truly mean by, "the person she believed you truly were"? I felt close to understanding but not yet there. The final letter, the one marked for the end, still waited unopened on her desk. And deep down I knew. The truth inside it would change everything. The final months in Rosewood were a quiet storm, the kind that brews beneath the surface long before the thunder ever sounds. Daniel, or perhaps Danielle, had stopped marking days on the calendar. What had once been a countdown to the end of a strange agreement now felt like a gentle flow of time, an existence that no longer demanded explanation. One morning, as the autumn leaves began to fall, he received a letter from his mother. She had been distant through the year, uncertain of how to approach what her late sister's will had required. The letter was simple but trembling with emotion. Your Aunt Grace always said you were her mirror, strong yet afraid of what you might see in yourself. I think I understand now why she chose you. Come home, Daniel. We need to talk. He folded the letter carefully and tucked it into the pocket of his floral skirt. The mirror across the room caught his reflection, soft waves of hair resting against his shoulders, his posture no longer forced. He realized how natural it had become, not the clothes, not the makeup, but the way he existed. Before leaving Rosewood, he visited his aunt's old study. The dust had settled thick across her shelves, but her presence was everywhere. In the books, the candles, the faint perfume that lingered on the curtains. On her desk was a small wooden box he had never noticed before. Inside was a faded photo. Aunt Grace, young and radiant, standing next to a person who looked almost like Daniel, only dressed in the same floral gown she often wore. The inscription read, "To live truthfully is the hardest form of courage." A soft realization bloomed inside him. The mystery his aunt had left was not just about femininity, but authenticity. She had wanted him to discover that identity wasn't about denial or conformity, but the quiet acceptance of every version of oneself. Returning home felt surreal. His mother stood on the porch, eyes wide but tender. She didn't speak at first. Instead, she reached out and touched his cheek. "You look like her," she whispered. "I feel like me," he replied softly. That night, over tea, they spoke for hours. His mother confessed that Grace had lived most of her life hiding who she truly was. Born as Gregory, but always feeling trapped behind a name that wasn't hers. Her final wish was for Daniel to walk a mile in that same hidden path, to understand the strength it takes to live freely. Tears welled up as Daniel realized the full truth. His aunt's wish was never punishment. It was freedom disguised as challenge. She had given him what she never had, a chance to live without shame. When the year ended, Daniel didn't pack away the dresses. He didn't shave his hair or return to his old wardrobe. Instead, he kept one simple pendant around his neck, Aunt Grace's locket, and a vow in his heart that he would live without fear for both of them. Months later, he stood by the sea, wearing a simple white dress that fluttered in the breeze. The waves whispered softly, carrying echoes of his aunt's laughter. For the first time, he didn't feel divided. He was whole, a balance of strength and softness, truth and illusion, Daniel and Danielle. He closed his eyes and whispered into the wind, "Thank you, Aunt Grace. I finally understand." The horizon shimmered gold, and the world seemed to exhale, peaceful, serene, and full of promise. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe to our channel.